The United States has a rich history of roller coasters, some states having had a large collection of coasters over the years, some states only having a small handful. Today we are going to go back in time and take a look at the very first coaster to open in each state. Some states go as far back as the 1800s, while some states waited until the 2000s before receiving their first coaster. Let's visit each state and honor the coaster that started it all for that state's coaster history. This is State of Stats, the first coaster for each state. Just like in the first episode of this series, we are going to go in alphabetical order by state. This isn't a ranking video series, but I may make a top 15 list at the end of the video. Or maybe I won't. Guess the only way to find out is to watch till the end. You see what I did there? In this video, I will give you as much information as I can find for these coasters. Many of these coasters have very little information about them. Many of them don't even have a single photo of them. A lot of these coasters had very short lifespans, and many of them existed in an era where photographing coasters was not commonplace. So some of these states I will keep very brief, only because there is very little information about them. Plus, we have a lot of states to cover. Nobody wants to be here for over an hour. Now before we go traveling in time, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also drop a like on the video while you're at it. Helps me out greatly against the YouTube algorithm. Huh. This is normally the part of the video when the YouTube algorithm disrupts me and I can't make the video anymore. Guess I'll do a coffee break while I'm stopped. Alright, that just happened. Now that that's out of the way, let's step into our time machine and venture into the early days of roller coasters in America. Something's telling me the journey back to the present is going to be much more disturbing than what we just witnessed. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Alabama. This state goes back to the early 1920s for coasters. The first coaster to open in Alabama was Big Dipper at East Lake Park. This opened in 1923. Big Dipper was the longest coaster in the South when it opened, being 1/4 mile long and standing at 54 feet. Alaska. This state has only ever had one coaster, and it didn't open until 2021, this being Aftershock, an Interpark Galaxies icon. This operates at the Alaska State Fair. I think our time machine must be broken. We're way too close to the present being in 2021. Let's get back to the old times. 1949? I guess that's a step in the right direction. Arizona. The first coaster in this state was Little Dipper at Enchanted Island. This opened in 1949. This was an Alan Herschel Little Dipper. Nothing special about this coaster. On to the next. Okay, time machine, for real. Let's get to some really old coasters. 1908, that's more like it. Arkansas. This state really threw me for a loop, pun fully intended. I start all my research on RCDB and explore elsewhere to solidify my research. RCDB lists an unknown coaster at Electric Park being the first coaster to open in Arkansas. This opened sometime between 1908 and 1909. But while exploring elsewhere in my research, I discovered another coaster in the state that opened before this one. This coaster's name is also unknown, but it opened in 1905 at Pulaski Heights Amusement Park. Here's an ad in the Arkansas Gazette from July 19th, 1905, showing all of the attractions at the park. Here's another article from the Arkansas Gazette from March 11th of 1905, mentioning contracts for the park, also explaining that the roller coaster or scenic railway-like coaster was to be included with this park, specifically mentioning a scenic railway similar to the Pike at St. Louis, which opened the year prior in 1904. So wherever this coaster may have been, this was the first coaster in Arkansas. California. Hosting the most coasters for any state in the country, California's first coaster opened in 1893 with scenic railway at the California Midwinter Inter-Exposition. This only operated until 1895. These scenic railway coasters did not have a long service life. Colorado. For this state, we will go to a park that's still in operation today, Elitch Gardens. The first coaster to open here in 1904 was Toboggan Slide. This was the PTC figure 8 side friction coaster. This operated until 1925. Connecticut. Seems fitting that we'll find the first coaster for this state at the oldest operating amusement park in the country, Lake Compounce, which opened in 1846. But the first coaster didn't open until 1914 with Green Dragon. This was a wooden out and back coaster that stood where Wildcat stands today. Green Dragon operated at the park until 1926, but was it actually green? Ryan from Post, help me out here. Delaware. This state making its very first entry in this series. While Delaware has no operating coasters currently, they did have some in the past. The first coaster in Delaware was Toboggan Slide at Brandywine Springs. This opened in 1901, and it's not sure when the ride closed. This was a figure 8 side friction coaster. This park had a second coaster that opened in 1903 called Scenic Railway. Florida. There isn't too much that's known about the first coaster in Florida. Many websites show this picture from Dixieland with what seems to be a side friction coaster. Nobody seems to know what the name of this coaster was. Many articles say that this coaster opened at the park in 1907 and operated until about 1916. This is all the information I could find on this coaster. If anybody happens to know the name of this coaster, please let me know in the comments. Georgia. Elevated Scenic Railway, opening in 1895 at the Cotton States International Exposition. I had to do some deep digging to find this photo. I'm surprised I even found it because it's so difficult to see. But you can see the track and the trains with the guests on them. This operated for only a few months, as many coasters built for an exposition only operated for the duration of the event. Hawaii, making its debut in this series with the only coaster that it's ever had, Big Dipper at Waikiki Park, opening in 1922 and operated until 1925. This was an out-and-back wooden coaster. The park opened as Aloha Park, but was renamed to Waikiki Park in 1924. The park would close in 1925 after filing for bankruptcy. Idaho, another scenic railway, opening in 1910 at White City in Boise. No stats of this coaster are really known, but by the looks of it, it was a figure-8 side friction coaster. It's unsure as to when this coaster closed. My best guess would be 1934, when the park was severely damaged from a windstorm and closed down for good. Illinois, this state will give us one of the older coasters on this list. Roller coaster, opening in 1884 at State Street Park. This was a circular layout coaster. RCDB says that this opened in 1883, but that's only when the patent for the ride was applied for. The patent was approved on January 1st of 1884, and the ride was built and opened later that year. About as simple as it gets for a coaster layout. But for its time, it was a revolutionary design, standing about 23 feet off the ground and had a diameter of about 140 feet. We'll see another one of these later in the video. Indiana. Here we will find Switchback Railway at Fairview Park, which was just that, a switchback railway that operated from 1892 to 1894. I couldn't find any photos of this coaster, just some photos of the park. Iowa, yet again, another switchback railway. This one opened in 1890 at Riverside Park and operated until 1896. I couldn't find any pictures of this specific coaster, only mentions of it throughout various articles. The photos I'm showing here is the coaster that came after it, which opened in 1908, being the second coaster to open in Iowa. Kansas, roller coaster at Iowa Electric Park. This opened around 1900 and operated until about 1919. This was a figure-8 side friction coaster, and the only photo I could find of this coaster was in the very corner of this photo right here. Kentucky, Scenic Railway at Ludlow Lagoon. This opened in 1895 and operated until 1917. This had a 2-level turnaround. Cars would enter the top of the building and twist down 2 levels and exit at the bottom of the building. Then they would continue into the rest of the course. This turnaround was nicknamed the Corkscrew. This was designed by LaMarcus Thompson, known as the father of roller coasters for designing what's known as the first roller coaster in America. We'll get to that coaster later in the video. Louisiana. Another White City amusement park makes it onto this list, with another coaster where its name is not known. This coaster opened at the park in 1891 and operated until about 1903. This was a double figure-8 side friction coaster. Why is there a fiery blaze in the background? Apparently everything caught on fire in these days. Maine, U.S. Scenic Railway at Seaside Park opened in 1902 and operated until 1915. I couldn't find many articles on this coaster, but the pictures give a good idea of what this coaster was. It was a typical scenic railway with a turnaround. Maryland, the first coaster in my home state was Switchback Railway at Holchester Amusement Park. This opened in 1884 and operated until 1912. This actually opened on the same day as Switchback Railway at Coney Island in New York, which is considered the first coaster in America, so I guess Maryland can share that title with New York. Massachusetts, Switchback Railway opened at Mountain Park in 1895 and operated until about 1900. Not much is known about this coaster, other than that it opened around the time that Mountain Park added a cable rail to transport guests to the top of Mount Tom, which overlooked the area that the park was in. Michigan, Island Roller Coaster at Seven Islands Resort opened in 1891 and operated until 1893. This coaster acted as a one-way ride over the river to get from one island on the resort to the casino on the resort. I guess that's one way to hype up guests before hitting up the casino.
Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it!
Minnesota, Toboggan at Wildwood Amusement Park opened in 1893 and operated until around 1905. This was a figure-8 side friction coaster. I couldn't find any photos showing the full coaster, only these 2 photos showing tiny parts of it. Let's call it the LaCroix of coaster photos, just a suggestion of a hint of the actual thing. Mississippi, super coaster at Magic Gulf Biloxi Beach Park. This operated from 1961 to 2005. It closed with the park due to Hurricane Katrina. This was either a BA Shift kiddie coaster or a Malona and Sons kiddie coaster. Missouri, Figure 8 at Doling Park opened in 1906 and it's not known when this coaster closed. No known photos of this coaster exist either. This photo is just from the shoot-to-shoots at the park. Montana, another Figure 8, this one at Columbia Gardens, opening in 1906, originally as a 3-level coaster. It was later modified to 2 levels in 1918 after an accident that happened in 1917. The ride would be modified again in 1928 into a double out and back style coaster and was renamed to roller coaster. The coaster would continue to operate in this form until it closed with the park in 1973, closing as the 4th oldest operating coaster in the world at the time, and the last surviving coaster from 1906. Nebraska, Griffith Scenic Railway, opened in 1898 at the Greater American Exposition, and only operated until 1899. This was an out-and-back quasi-Mobius loop scenic railway coaster. When the coaster opened in 1898, the exposition was named the Trans-Mississippi Exposition. This exposition ended at the end of 1898. The next year, the Greater American Exposition used many of the buildings and rides from the previous event held there, and this coaster would operate for that exposition as well. The ride would close later that year in 1899. Nevada, roller coaster opening at Funland in 1954, having a short service life, closing in 1955. The only photo I could find of this coaster was this postcard with a drawing of the park. This was a PTC Junior wooden coaster. I don't think the coaster actually looked like this. Most likely it was similar to the PTC Woodstock Expresses that we see at Kings Island and Kings Dominion. I'm sure Richard Zimmerman would have a heyday removing this coaster. New Hampshire, Figure 8 at Pine Island Park, opened in 1908, and it's not entirely sure when this coaster closed. As obvious by the name, it was a Figure 8 side friction coaster. RCDP says that it could have been opened before 1908, but this article claims that it was built in 1908 by Ingersoll Amusement Company of Pittsburgh. New Jersey, for a state with a very rich history in coasters, there's not much known about its very first coaster, nor what its name was. I couldn't find any photos of this coaster, but it's believed that the first coaster in New Jersey was at Nolan's Point Park that opened in 1887. Given that this was a trolley park and being a much earlier coaster, my guess is that this was a switchback railway of some kind. New Mexico, coaster at Uncle Cliff's Kiddieland, opened in 1959 and closed in 1963. This was a BA Shift kiddie coaster. Nothing exciting here. Moving on. New York, one of the most famous coasters in history and is often claimed as the first coaster to open in America. Gravity Pleasure Switchback Railway, opening in 1884. This design from Lamarcus Thompson would lead to countless switchback railway coasters to show up at trolley parks and amusement parks around the country. This coaster alone could be responsible for the general public gaining interest in thrill rides. We all owe this coaster and Lamarcus Thompson a massive thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, that's not creepy at all. Okay, bye. North Carolina, Figure 8 at Lakewood Park opened in 1901, and it's not entirely sure when this coaster closed. Most likely in the 1930s. Just another Figure 8 side friction coaster. This coaster was labeled as unknown on RCDB, but after a little digging around, I was able to identify this coaster. North Dakota. Here's a state with only one coaster in their history, Runaway Train, a Wisdom Rides Dragon Wagon. This opened at Super Slide Amusement Park in 2009. Next to riding a wild bison, Runaway Train, to this day, still offers the best thrills in North Dakota. Ohio. Here's another state with a very rich history in coasters. There's very little information known about its very first coaster. The first coaster in Ohio opened at Chippewa Lake Park in 1885, and that's all that's really known about it. No known photos of this coaster exist. I read through a few articles of the Medina County Gazette from around that time in 1885. It's only referred to as the roller coaster. Perhaps its name was just roller coaster, but I have no way to confirm that. I wish I could offer more information for the first coaster of a state with such significant history in the amusement industry, but that's all I could find. Oklahoma, Scenic Railway at Delaware Gardens opened in 1906. This was a typical scenic railway. This coaster closed with the park in 1910 due to a mosquito epidemic, as this park ran along the North Canadian River. Oregon, Scenic Railway at Oaks Amusement Park opened in 1906. I was only able to find one photo of this coaster. It was a typical Figure 8 side friction coaster. This coaster had a rival coaster at Council Crest Park. The Scenic Railway at Oaks Amusement Park was known for being more of a thrilling ride, while the Scenic Railway at Council Crest was known for being well decorated and scenic looking. Just look at it. Isn't it just beautiful?
You look at it! Look at it!
Pennsylvania, debatably the state with the deepest history of coasters, and one of the states with the most remaining classic coasters in the country. Pennsylvania is home to the oldest standing coaster in the world, Liebe Dips. But the first coaster in Pennsylvania was Circular Gravity Railway, opening in 1885 at Oakland Beach. This park was on Cognac Lake. This was a super simple circular railway. It's not known when this coaster closed, most likely not too much longer after it opened, as these coasters had a very short service life. Rhode Island. This state has no operating coasters today, but it has had a few in the past. There are 3 possibilities for this one, all at the same park, Crescent Park. The first being Flying Toboggan, which opened in 1905 and operated until around 1915. This was a figure-8 side friction coaster. The second was Tickler, a spinning side friction coaster which opened on or before 1905. The third and most likely possibility was Scenic Railway. It's unsure when this coaster opened, but it's said to have operated until 1927. I'm more inclined to say that Scenic Railway was the first coaster for Rhode Island, given that it was a Lamarcus Thompson design. These coasters came around before figure-8 side friction coasters did. Given that the park opened in 1886 and added their rides in 1901, Scenic Railway makes the most sense as the first coaster in Rhode Island. South Carolina. Comet Jr. at Myrtle Beach Pavilion opened in 1951 and operated until 1966. This was a National Amusement Devices wooden coaster. The website for Myrtle Beach describes this as a pint-sized wooden coaster, so it was probably either a kiddie coaster or a small family wooden coaster. The only pictures of this coaster I could find were just on postcards. South Dakota. I couldn't find a name for this coaster, but I found 2 pictures of it. This was a double out and back side friction coaster. This coaster opened in 1905 that operated at the South Dakota State Fair and operated until shortly after 1915. Tennessee. Alright, fasten your seatbelts. This one is a doozy. I spent over 3 hours researching this, and this is the best I could come up with. There are 2 possibilities for this one. I cannot prove one way or another which came first. The first one is an unknown coaster that opened at Glendale Park. Literally nothing is known about the details of this coaster, other than the fact that it existed. Glendale Park operated from 1887 to 1932, operating under the name Woodstock Park from 1887 to 1889. It's possible this coaster opened sometime between 1887 and 1909, but nobody seems to know for sure. The second candidate for this topic was very tricky to find, due to what I suspect to be a mix-up in the name. I always use RCDB as a starting point and go from there. RCDB lists the first coaster in Tennessee as a roller dips coaster at a park called Hocus Pocus Park. This coaster opened in 1909. I spent over an hour trying to find this park. Literally nothing exists of this park except on RCDB, so I'm not sure where they got that information from. However, I did find one park called Chilhowee Park, which seems to be on the same address as Hocus Pocus Park was on. I also found this photo on a postcard from Chilhowee Park from 1910 with what seems to be a side friction coaster. Perhaps somewhere in the void of time, the name of this park got mixed up. The fact that I found a photo of this coaster from 1910, I'm more inclined to say that this was the first coaster to open in Tennessee. Until I can find definitive proof that the first coaster opened before this one, I'm gonna go with the coaster at Chilhowee Park. I may dig deeper into this for another video. So little information seems to be known about either of these coasters, but we have more states to cover, and we spent enough time on this state. So moving on. Texas. Roller coaster at the State Fair of Texas opened in 1887 and closed in 1888 after an accident injured 5 people. This is the only photo that I could find that showed this coaster. This looks like it was a switchback railway coaster. It's said that this was an unlicensed coaster, as this coaster was not listed in Lamarcus Thompson's Switchbacks of 1888, who at the time was the only company licensed to build switchback railways. The operator/leaser of the coaster supposedly fled shortly after the accident. Not suspicious at all, right? Utah. Scenic Railway at Lagoon opened at the park in 1907 and operated until 1920. This was a double figure-8 side friction coaster. This coaster was located where roller coaster stands today. Vermont. It's not known when this coaster opened, but the park it operated at closed around 1925, which is before any other coasters in this state opened. Figure-8 at Clements Park. That's really all that's known about this coaster. Given the name, most likely a figure-8 side friction coaster, and no known photos of this coaster exist either. Virginia. Figure-8 toboggan at Pine Beach Park. This opened in 1904 and operated until 1906. This was one of the first coasters ever built by PTC, with 5 others opening that same year. This is the only photo that I could find that has some part of the coaster of it in real life, tucked away in the corner, probably photographed by accident. There's also this photo here that shows the entire boardwalk, but it's just a drawing. But it gives us a general idea of what it was. Washington. Another figure-8 opening at Natatorm Park in 1906. This operated until 1919. I was only able to find this one photo with the coaster in it. It just happened to be in the background of this photo. This was a figure-8 side friction coaster. West Virginia. Roller coaster at Ruling Coney Island Park. This opened in 1905 and closed in 1906. This was a figure-8 side friction coaster. And the last one for this video. This coaster closed with the park in 1907 due to a flood. Wisconsin. Very little is known about this coaster, as it was a very early coaster for the United States. Shaw's roller coaster at Silverton Springs opened in 1885. That's about all that's known about this coaster. Given the time period that it was in, it was likely a switchback railway, since the very first one of these opened just a year prior in 1884. Wyoming. For the grand finale of this video, we are going to look at a mysterious coaster that could have possibly been a knockoff, with a roller coaster at Funland. This operated from 1959 to 1990. This was suspected to be a knockoff Little Dipper from Alan Herschel. This coaster went in the opposite direction as every other Alan Herschel Little Dipper went. This coaster traveled clockwise. Every other Alan Herschel Little Dipper went counterclockwise. The trains and the supports for this coaster were distinctly different than any other Little Dipper out there. So was this a knockoff? I guess it's a mystery that we'll just never know. And that concludes our journey to the past. Time machine, take us back to 2025, please. Well, that was terrifying. Now that we're back to the present, what stats would you guys like to see in this series for future episodes? Comment down below. You guys really seem to like this series, and I have a lot of fun making them too. I probably did over 25 hours of research for this video, and I had a blast making this video. I learned about a lot of coasters that I've never heard of before. Hopefully you guys learned something too. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. If you made it this far into the video, here's a top 15 list that I did not promise, but here you go anyway. Alright guys, I'll wrap the video up here. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next loop.